took a drive late one night. What happened will haunt me for the rest of my life. Oh, Guy, before I forget, would it be possible for you to assist me with something? As he shoved a bag of potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strikes into a plastic bag, the cashier, a young man with acne who appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s, looked up. He appeared to be still for a moment while he stood there. Then he responded at last. "Yes, what's going on, dude?" I sighed, barely audibly. To put it kindly, I had been half afraid that I would be told to take a lengthy walk off a small pier. With a sigh of relief, I took what was in my back pocket. You see, I feel like I've kind of lost my way out here. I chose to travel late at night and ended up getting lost on all these 2-lane country roads. Before I drove on, I spread out the map and placed it on the counter for both of us to view. So, could you perhaps let me know where we are in general on this site and how to return to the main road, which is more crucial? After a prolonged period of quietness, the child started to giggle, first quietly and then more loudly. "A paper map, dude." Between wheezes, he managed to say, "Are you serious? Which year is this, 1993 in your opinion?" For my part, I just sighed in resignation. It appeared that my suspicion that I would receive this kind of response from someone his age had been validated. I can't claim I didn't anticipate it. "Really, bro, don't you have GPS in your car or something?" he asked, wiping tears from the corners of his eyes before turning to face me. He inquired. I instantly hooked a thumb over my shoulder to indicate the beige vehicle seated at the gas pump's glass entry door. "Not in a 1979 Honda Accord," I said plainly. I could see he wanted to make another joke as he glanced out the door behind me, most likely about how I ought to get a newer car or something. Fortunately, though, he didn't tell anyone. Rather, he leaned over the map and started to look at it, while still chuckling quietly to himself. He snapped his fingers a few seconds later. "Hey, I still understand. We're right about here, roughly 6 or 7 miles outside Placer," he remarked triumphantly before pushing his finger down close to the center of the map and looking up at me. I bent over the counter to watch him pull his finger away. "This is where," he nodded, and I took a pen from my pocket to remember myself to circle the region before I left. I then looked at the map in more detail. "All right, it looks like I could return to Interstate 5 by taking more than a few routes." The child nodded once more, displaying a mildly irritated expression that made it obvious he was already tired of the strange exchange. He just answered, "Sure," and set my bundled belongings on top of the map. "This will cost $14.50, and the gas will cost $28.50. I took my wallet out of my pocket, took out $3 $20 and gave them to him. With a distinctive clang, the register exploded open, and he inserted the bills before extracting it and giving me my change. I picked up the bag, folded the map back up, and put it and my money back in my pocket. As I turned to leave, I said, "Thanks for the help." As I walked to the front door and pushed it open, I heard him murmur, "Yeah, no problem." As I went outside and allowed the door to swing close behind me, a tiny bell dangled from the inside handle. The sounds of a summer forest at night took the place of the humming refrigerators and the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights. The buzzing of the lights over the pumps was nearly drowned out by the loud buzzing of crickets and cicadas in the grass surrounding the store. A loud hoot from an owl reverberated through the trees, followed by the shrill cry of what must have been an elk. I took a deep breath of the fresh air before descending the stairs to my vehicle. Before settling into the driver's seat, I opened the driver's door and gave the place one more glance. "Did you discover our location then?" A voice from the passenger seat inquired. I whirled in my seat for a moment as a feeling of bewilderment and panic passed over me. It was instantly replaced with a surge of shame, which was heightened as my friend started to chuckle deeply. Dude, did you spend so much time in there that you forgot I was waiting for you outside? I shook my head, unable to acknowledge that I had done so. Nope, dude, not that. He nodded empathetically. Just dealing with the kid in there was a major headache. Craig was a dear buddy of mine. Ever after our first encounter, we had clicked right away and remained together ever since. We both enjoyed taking late-night journeys to nowhere, just driving around aimlessly while listening to the radio and occasionally sharing a joint that one of us would purchase. However, this is the first time we have ever lost our way. I took out the bottle of Mr. Pibb from the bag and gave it to him. I just said, "Here," before taking out the Lucky Strikes and throwing the others in the back seat. After taking the key out of my pocket, I inserted it into the ignition and turned it on, causing the dash lights to illuminate and the car's buzzer to sound. A moment later, the inline four's classic burble came softly to life. Before reaching to insert the car's cigarette lighter, I tore open the packaging, took a cigarette out of the pack, and inserted it into the corner of my mouth. I glanced back at the store as I was doing so, and stopped. The realization that the child was standing at the door, peering out at us, sent a little chill down my spine. What the devil? Craig looked at himself after catching my eye. Dude, what on earth is wrong with him? When the lighter came out again, indicating that it was ready to use, I shook my head. After briefly pressing the luminous red coil on the smoke's tip to light it, I put it back in its slot. Feeling a little uneasy, I took it off my lips and blew out a cloud of smoke before responding. I gave it a final look and said, "I don't know, but honestly, man, that's more than a bit creepy." The child was staring out of the glass with an unsettling intensity, without blinking. Craig responded, "Come on, let's get out of here," which echoed what was going through my head. As I eased off the clutch and shifted into first gear, the automobile started to drift forward. As we crept out from under the lights into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of him turning and shooting the bird at the child. I heard him murmur, "Prick." I veered the vehicle to the left and started to return the way we had come. "The good news is that I did figure out where we are," I said, taking the map out of my pocket and giving it to my friend. After a moment of his fumbling, I heard a little flashlight click on as he pointed it at the map. "How did we get nearly as far east as Placer, dude?" he questioned, seeming a little surprised. I replied, pulling down my window to blow away the ashes from my smoke. "Longer drive than usual, I guess." I glanced at the dashboard's analog clock. It read 2:45. I gave a little sigh. Excellent. Vanessa is probably really anxious about us at the moment, particularly me. My fiancé had been anxious about my propensity to take lengthy, late-night journeys when I couldn't sleep ever since we began dating 5 years ago. She was always worried that I would strike an animal, wrap my Honda around a tree, or collide with another vehicle. She was always sitting up waiting for me when I got home, her lovely sapphire eyes displaying distress. I chewed a tiny bit of my lip. Hey, should I text Vanessa to let her know that everything is all right? I questioned Craig. He snorted and I heard it. Really, dude? No. The woman must realize you know what you're doing, even though I'm glad she cares so much, and I know she loves you unconditionally. You two also need some privacy. The amount of time you two spend together is unhealthy. I snorted and threw the cigarette's remainder out the window. He laughed when I said, Dude, you should try it sometime. It's called being in love. Thanks, but I like being single too much. As the headlights led the way, I shook my head and gazed out the windshield. As the two-lane road stretched out in front of us, the moon in the sky nearly obscured by the trees above our heads, I started to feel a little uneasy. At least 2 hours had passed since I last saw another vehicle on the road. Well, Derek, what did you expect? There are only ghost towns here. You drove into the boonies. The next time, Why don't you try driving all the way to Idaho? I shook my head and fished for a while in the center console before taking out a mixtape. A little music would lift my spirits. I inserted it into the cassette player in the car and pressed play. Dance with the Dead's That House started blaring from the speakers a moment later, with its throbbing bass and synths. Craig gave an enthusiastic yell. "Yes, dude! We need music like that for a drive like this." To whoop and holler into the night, he rolled down the passenger window and stuck his head out. I couldn't help but smile at his antics and shook my head. What a fucking idiot. The light-hearted tone eased my anxiety, and I felt myself unwind in the chair as the stress left my body and went out the window. The road stretched out in front of us and then vanished into the darkness behind us, the radio blaring music and the quiet rumble of the engine in the background. That was how things proceeded for a few minutes. I glanced at the lighted clock once again. 5 minutes to 3 was now displayed. In a minute, we ought to reach the highway. After the last of the tension in my body was released by the notion, I fumbled for the bag in the back seat and caught it with the tips of my fingers. I took my Coke bottle out of it and smashed the cap while holding the bottle to the steering wheel. I raised it to my lips and took a gulp, tilting my head back and briefly averting my gaze from the road. I turned to face the road. I almost hurled everything onto the windshield. A figure had emerged into the road in the instant I had stopped looking. "Fucking hell!" I screamed while applying as much pressure as I could to the clutch and brake. The car's back wheels locked up, and the cabin was filled with the deafening sound of tires screaming. I was horrified to see the car's tail end start to slide out. No. Oh no. For a brief period, everything around us was a haze of colors and shapes, and I was afraid we may crash into a tree or start rolling. Fortunately, the suspension screeched in protest when the car finally came to a halt. I could tell from the black marks on the road that used to be my tire's rubber that we were facing back the way we had come. With my heart thumping wildly in my chest, I clutched the steering wheel with a death hold. I breathed in harsh, short gasps. Craig leaned ahead and turned off the music after a few seconds of the car being motionless. "What the fuck, dude?" His face must have been as pale as mine when he yelled at me. I remained silent with him. Instead, I virtually slammed the door open, took off my seatbelt, and applied the handbrake. On wobbly legs, I went out onto the pavement and moved to the front of the automobile until I was directly between the headlight beams. I scanned my surroundings, first the road in front of me and then the woods on either side. Nothing was there. What the? I gazed over the car's roof and behind me. A few feet ahead were illuminated by the red glow of the taillights. But beyond that, there was just darkness. I pivoted once more, gazing out at the shadows that lay beyond the branches. It was silent, save for the soft hum of the car's motor, and no movement shook the trees and bushes. I gave a head shake. Did I just dream about this? I gave it another shake. No, I'm positive I didn't have any hallucinations. Someone was present. I turned as soon as I heard the car door open and saw Craig get out. "You have exactly 20 seconds to explain to me what the hell just happened before I lose it, bro," he said, leaving the door open and approaching me right away. He yelled. I struggled to find my voice for a moment before responding. I'm not crazy, buddy. Someone entered the road after emerging from the woods. It had a feminine appearance. I was afraid I was going to hit her. I let myself to release the breath I had been holding in an attempt to calm myself. Craig looked at me bewildered. "Are you serious, man?" I gave a nod. He reached into his pocket, took out the flashlight he had used to view the map, and turned it on, aiming it first at the tree line on one side of the road and then the other. "Well, whoever it was, they're not there anymore," he said, turning back to me after repeating this a few times. his brow furrowed. However, why would a woman be on this remote location? More to himself than to me, he muttered. Still, I responded. Dude, I have no idea. Josephine County, for crying out loud. Something had captured my attention, but I heard my friend snort with laughter and respond, For as many good people live out here, there's also a bunch of weirdos. A sensation that struck me with the force of a Peterbilt, the sensation of eyes penetrating my skull's back. I turned around and saw nothing when I looked back at the automobile. However, the sensation persisted, and I was not pleased with it at all, particularly when the sensation returned, this time coming from the direction I had just been facing. As I came to this realization, a chill went up my spine and a flash of horror appeared. "Oh, shh," I said. Craig turned to face me and said, "What?" Observing my expression, he asked. He said it again. "What?" I spoke in a somewhat weak voice as I gazed up at him. "Now, let's get back in the car." Luckily, he didn't argue. He was already heading for the open passenger door, and as I felt more and more watched, I kept up with him, like someone was coming fast out of the forest. God damn it. I tore at the door handle and nearly threw myself into the driver's seat as I burst into a run and then a full-out sprint for the final 10 feet. I pressed down on the door latch and saw Craig follow suit, slamming the door shut behind me. His face was obscured by the darkness when he turned to face me, but his words provided a clear mental picture of it. What on earth was that guy? The tone of it made it clear that he had experienced the same sense of dread and panic as I did, even if only briefly. Do you recall those films of individuals driving in the middle of the night on deserted roads only to be stopped by someone crossing the road? I inquired. He finished my idea with a sudden intake of air from the passenger seat before he spoke. And then, oh no, a group of people tried to ambush them by jumping out of the woods. Exactly what I was thinking. It's time to go. I pressed the parking brake, fastened my seatbelt, and shifted the vehicle into first gear. As I pressed the gas, the tires began to chirp, and a moment later we were speeding away. As we did, the sensation of being watched quickly vanished, and I was able to exhale in relief. Before I spoke again, we drove in silence for a few more minutes. Craig chuckled quietly and said, "I think we're in the clear, man." I nodded and then grabbed the drink that had fallen and managed to evade it by using the parking brake. Thank fuck for that. I grabbed it, unscrewed the cap, and took another gulp, the still cool liquid rushing down my throat. I laughed as well, picking it up and putting it in the back seat behind me. I don't intend to sound like a Debbie Downer, Craig, but I think I might take a short vacation from late-night driving after this. There was nothing for a few seconds, longer than I anticipated, until he responded. This simply got under my skin too much. I can understand, bro, even though that's terrible. Absolutely no issue. Along with something else I couldn't identify, I thought I could pick up a hint of melancholy in his voice, but then I heard him sit up straight. "Hey, Jake?" he inquired with a hint of worry now in his voice. "Yes," he took another breath, and I heard it. "Aren't we supposed to be on the freeway by now, or at least be able to see the lights of cars going by?" His remarks caused me to twist my head to look past my headlights, which were the only thing I had been paying close attention to. What the devil? He was correct. Through the darkness, you should be able to see the lights of passing automobiles and trucks on the expressway. I vividly recall seeing the constant red and white glows speeding by in both directions at nearly the same distance as we were now when I looked in my side view mirror after we had turned off the highway into the road. That was no longer the case. I saw nothing but blackness ahead of us. The forests on each side of the road and the darkness. As my mind raced, I briefly removed my foot from the accelerator and allowed the car to slow down. He must be wrong. In fact, I must be wrong. Simply put, we still haven't approached the highway closely enough. Derek, you are familiar with these old routes. They frequently turn out to be lengthier than they appear. The concept made me feel a little relieved, so I told Craig aloud. He nodded, but it was clear to me that he wasn't quite convinced. Furthermore, even though I told myself this over and over in my head, I was unable to fully persuade myself. I felt as though I had been shook more than I had initially believed when I saw the woman cross the street. I moved into fourth gear, pressed the gas pedal again, and watched as the speedometer flirted with 55 miles per hour. We drove in quiet for a few more minutes, neither of us seeing anything. Craig cried out after that. "There, a light!" A glimmer of optimism briefly filled me, and I peered over the steering wheel to see the highway. I hurried when I saw it was just a streetlight, standing sentry-like on the side of the road. There was an old, weathered sign underneath it that appeared to have been hit by both real bullets and BB pellets numerous times. In order to read it, I slowed the car down a little as it approached us, and had a surge of bewilderment. 2 miles, Golden. What the fuck? As Craig read the placard, he exhaled. As it went by us, the streetlight briefly illuminated the car's inside and revealed the bewildered, anxious expression on his face. How on earth did we get to Golden? Golden is a ghost town that draws tourists each year to see the surviving structures. Originally a mining hamlet with a few hundred residents, it became the ghost town it is now after the early to mid-20th century prospects dried up. Its appearance on Ghost Adventures a few years ago is now its greatest claim to fame. Craig asked the same question again, but I was unable to respond. My mind was whirling with ideas. Golden is miles north of Placer, therefore there's no chance in hell. According to what I could see on the map, there are no roads that connect the two places. In addition, ever since we left the petrol station, we have been traveling in a straight line. I finally responded, "I honestly don't know, man," my voice expressing how shaken I really was. I watched him put his head in his hands in the dark inside of the car. I struggled for my pack of cigarettes, pushing in the cigarette lighter and taking another out with shaky fingers. The turnoff to the ghost town raced by on the right a second later. For a brief while, I saw the black, ominous shape of the church's spire rise out of the shadows. Then we were over it. I pulled out the lighter, rubbed it against the smoke, lit it, and replaced it. I made the decision that I had to attempt to ease the growing tension that pervaded the car's interior. Look, guy, no matter how we got here, the fact remains that we must be close to the freeway at this point. So, let's just be calm and keep our wits about us. Vanessa, you and I can joke about this when we return to my apartment. Does that sound good? I heard my friend inhale deeply and then exhale with a whoosh. He laughed softly and gave me a shoulder slap. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan. Thank you, Derek. You truly are a wonderful friend. I nodded, then remembered that he might not be able to see it in the dark. I'm glad I have you. I said, "No problem, man." I glanced at the timepiece, 3 a.m. It had only been 5 minutes since I had last glanced at it. However, it felt more like 30 years had passed. When you're under stress, everything seems different. There was nothing but blackness for several minutes. Then, in the distance, a light emerged. "Hey, we're off!" I yelled. I waited for the on-ramp sign to arrive. And when the sign for Golden passed by once more, I felt a chill go up my spine. That's what? Craig remained silent, but I could feel him tensing up in the passenger seat, indicating that he had also noticed. A feeling crept up on me as the sign and streetlight vanished behind us. When I recognized that it was the same sensation I had experienced when we had exited the vehicle, another chill went up my spine. The sensation of being watched. I glanced at the haze of trees on each side of the vehicle, but I couldn't make out anyone. Once more, the turnoff to the ghost town came into view. Craig took another long breath and I heard it. "Please pull over, Derek," he urged plainly. Even though I didn't want to, I complied with his request and pulled over right before the turnoff, even though his voice was trembling. After tearing off his seatbelt, he pushed the door open and got out. I stood for a minute watching him walk to the front of the automobile. I saw how badly this was affecting him as he appeared to begin to shake a little. When I looked at the clock, I went for the door handle and unbuckled my seatbelt and stopped. 3 a.m. was still displayed on the clock. The hands had remained still. As I tapped it with my fingertips to check whether it was just stuck, a rush of shock swept over me, but it wouldn't start up again. "All right, what the devil is happening?" I said to myself in a whisper. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and turned on the screen. It displayed the time as 3 a.m. just like the clock. As the sensation of being watched grew stronger, I looked down at Craig standing in the dark and started typing a text message to Vanessa. "Hello, little girl. I wanted to inform you that Craig and I are doing well. We've gotten a little lost out here, but we're attempting to get back to the highway. Would you please text me back if I don't text you again in 15 minutes? I cherish you." I put the phone back in my pocket. I was starting to get a little stressed out about the unusual situation, even though I knew I should have been more honest. I didn't want to worry her any more than was absolutely necessary because it would make me even more anxious. I pushed the door open, stepped out, and circled, pausing close to the right front headlamp. "Hey, how are you?" After a little while, I asked him. Happily, he appeared to have stopped shaking, but he did not respond. I asked the same question again. My second and third calls were unanswered, and I started to have a new feeling, a powerful concoction of terror and dread. "Craig, you're really creeping me out, dude. Please say anything." At last, he turned to face me, and I could see that his face had become rather pale in the headlights' semi-glow. Without uttering a word, he pointed with a finger. "Observe." I followed his action with my eyes, and I had the impression that someone had thrown a pail of icy water on my head. The cigarette that was hanging from my lips dropped to the floor. A figure stood just within the tree line, some 50 feet distant. It was somber, but I gasped when I recognized it as the same woman who had almost ruined my life. Oh man, fuck me sideways. After swallowing, I found my voice. "Well, we ought to. Craig, we ought to go back in the car." He nodded very instantly. His voice faltered as he said, "I think you might be right." We cautiously retreated till we arrived at our individual doors and climbed inside, keeping our gaze fixed on the figure. I didn't bother fastening my seatbelt at all. I simply floored it by jamming the gear shifter into first. The car sped forward onto the road as pebbles and dirt kicked out behind us. I applied more pressure this time. The engine started to roar as I moved into third, then fourth, keeping my foot firmly planted. As I put the car in fifth gear and the speedometer hit 60, I felt more and more like I was being watched. I hoped to see something, anything in front of us. A junction, a home, for heaven's sake, a payphone that isn't even in use. Then a light appeared in front of us, and my blood turned to ice. It was identical to the last one, except for the sign underneath. My gaze strayed to the clock, and when I noticed that it was still stopped, fear swept through me. Craig said from the passenger seat, "This isn't good, bro." Although I didn't say it aloud, I agreed with him. With the speedometer now reaching 80, I continued to keep my foot to the ground. Once more, the turnoff appeared, and I wanted to shout at what I saw. The road had drawn nearer to the woman. Furthermore, she was no longer alone. I could see others behind her, other people's outlines, dozens, perhaps even more. Facing the road, they all stood, observing us as we pass. They vanished into the rearview mirror after that. As the light and sign flashed by one more, I exhaled. Fuck. The crowd had gathered much nearer the road this time. The headlights briefly highlighted the woman as she stood in front of them all. The sight of the river of blood flowing down the front of her nightgown, which appeared to be decades old, sent another jolt of cold through my veins. "What on earth do we do?" Craig asked me in a steady but fearful tone, much like I did. I simply gave a head shake. All I could say was, "I don't know, man." I almost slammed on the brakes in surprise as I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket, and the street light started to appear again. Craig glanced at me as I groped for it in my pocket. When we stopped, I texted Vanessa, instructed her to respond within a few minutes. He didn't respond, instead turning to face the approaching light outside the windshield. Now I think I'm going to tell her to call the cops or something. As we sped past the light, I made myself not to look at the turnoff, flitting my eyes from the phone screen to the road and back. Whatever those ghouls or devils were, I didn't want to see how near they had come to the road. As the light started to come back on, I flipped my finger, pushing the lock screen away and pressing on the messenger button. Vanessa's message opened automatically, and for a few minutes the tiny bit of normalcy I was able to control sent a wave of relief through me like I had never experienced before. I went cold. I didn't even glance at the road above. I was unable to. I read and reread the one sentence with my eyes fixed on it. I was enough confused to speak out loud. "What the fuck?" Craig raised his voice. What did she say?" I didn't respond to him. I was trying to understand and my mind was going a million miles per hour. However, I felt as though I was striking a mental block. Another concept occurred to me, so I tried to come up with something else, but I was getting the same block again. As it happened, I started to feel a fresh surge of fear, one for a very different purpose than the frightful loop that flies by outside. Our speed was now 90, according to the speedometer. Then Craig said something. "Dude, may I ask you a question?" Every vein in my body was filled with ice. It was his voice, not his inquiry. It was different. The anxiety and fear he had experienced only a minute before had vanished. He just sounded flat now. "No, it's not flat." His tone gave me the impression that he was grinning, though I couldn't determine why. When I finally forced myself to respond, my mouth feeling as dry as cotton, another chill went up my spine. "What?" As we started to fly in the streetlight, he responded, "Are you afraid?" The query, for some reason, caused me to turn to face him as the light flashed past us. The interior of the automobile briefly regained its illumination. His eyes met me. The light passed quickly. When the turnoff came up again, I briefly looked up to see that the woman was directly beside the road, well illuminated by the headlights. At last, I managed to get a peek of her face. Then the car veered to the right and I was screaming while my fingers tore at the door handle. A tree was flying in the direction of the windshield. I didn't consider. I simply pried open the door and jumped out. The ground shot up to meet me in a flash. Darkness. I woke up in a hospital room with one arm in a sling and a bandage over my head. I also felt like my chest was burning. Vanessa was the first person I saw when I woke up, and she immediately put her arm over me and started crying. The doctor entered a little while later. He told me that I was fortunate to have escaped with only a fractured arm, badly bruised ribs, and a cut in my head that needed staples. He raised an eyebrow and remarked, "Shocking for having dove out of a car at what appeared to be tremendous speed." Then he informed me that I was the target of a police interview. After he let them in, 2 officers came in and started questioning me. I explained everything to them. Well, except for 2 little details. They promised to investigate and seemed to take my account seriously. "We've had some reports like yours, sir," one of them hesitantly replied. Then they explained how they had located me. how I ended up unconscious in the grassy ditch when a father and son who ran a neighboring gas station were out driving and first saw my wrecked Honda, which had wrapped itself around a tree, and then more. They did not identify themselves. However, I knew fairly well who they had been. Well, the son, at least. 3 months have passed since that night. All this time, I've been recuperating and resting at home. I've had a lot of time to reflect. There's plenty of time to think about everything. I make an effort to forget about that evening, almost any of it. If I do, I think I'll lose my mind, particularly when the police informed me that they had not discovered anyone else at the collision site. The passenger door is the only one that is open. However, I was forced to do so after getting an email from an unidentified sender. One who said he was the son of the child I saw that evening in the gas station. He told me things. He had seen things for years, according to what his father told him, that he had absolutely no faith in, right up until that evening. As he peered at my automobile through the door, he had contacted his father in a panic at that point. I can feel my body trembling fiercely as I type this, remembering the woman's face flashing in the headlights. Yes, that was a ghost. She waved desperately at me to catch my attention, her face plastered with a horrified expression. The others must have had the same expression. As the light wavered, I recalled turning to face Craig and noticing the smile on his face. While I withdrew, the youngster told me he had been flashed the same shark-like smile that was bigger than any human's and filled with shark-like fangs, while black eyes gazed at me with hunger. The one piece of text Vanessa sent me, though, is what I remember most. What made me search desperately for memories of my friendship with the person seated across from me, and then feel horrified when I realized I was unable to come up with even one. What's going to prevent me from ever driving at night again? The 3 words that will always be etched in my mind. Who is Craig, darling?